for being here today and, just coming to hear what we have to talk about. And I've sat here and listened to everything that has been said, all the way from Dedan Kimathi University to what Angus said. Angus, right? Agava. I apologize. You have such a unique name, by the way. So, and I'm glad you have such grace and humility every time people keep getting it wrong, because you know. So, thank you so much. And thank you so much also for the work that you're doing down there. Mary actually whispered to me and said, we should go launch our book there. And I said, yes, right? And also just coming back to what Mary has said. And I feel like, for me, I really just want to give a personal account of what my journey has been that gave me the audacity to think that I have a contribution to make in speaking on behalf of Kenya on an international platform in a book that is going to be immortalized. Okay? So in 2025, I graduated with my master's here in 2004 in counseling psychology. And of course, I had graduated with my undergrad, I think it was 2002. So you can see I have a very long history with USIU, right? Coming to USIU at that time, it was very different than it is today. But what was true then and is still true now is that young people were basically inspiring and pushing each other to be able to know more than they think they know, and to be able to experiment with maybe what they should not even be experimenting with in the first place. So I want to talk about several things that pushed me in a different direction. Number one, we had a young man who was an undergraduate here, who was killed by the police, and later on they said they had confused him for Harold Mwau. He was driving a grey Pajero. Now, what happened with that assassination, and I'll call it that, there was a cloud of grief that enveloped this university, because there was an unspoken rule, I suppose, that was out there, that leave USIU students alone to do what they do because they pay enough to actually earn that. So to have one of us taken away in such a brutal way, and there was no accountability, there was a restlessness that was there. People were not exactly sure what to do. People were bereaved, people were angry, people were feeling helpless. Now this is what I believe made the difference for a lot of people and calmed things down, right? Professor Brown, the VC at the time, who I don't know how many of you know, but is a psychologist, said, you know what? Let the students have a peaceful protest. Let them walk the streets and express their grief and express their horror, and let them just feel like some social justice has happened by recognizing what has happened and elevating that. And honestly, it diffused everything. So for me, that was the first time to be able to connect not just psychology as a practice of being able to work with people and families and couples, but from a leadership perspective, that you can use your understanding of human beings, not just on a day-to-day, but when there is conflict or potential conflict, but also how to be able to use your understanding of human psychology, human behavior, to be able to diffuse situations, okay? So that, for me, I must tell you, was fundamentally transformative. I don't know if there is anyone who can speak to that, but for me, it was a junction moment. And so I took the opportunity to say, well, I want to do something different then, because how does somebody get there? Now, at the time, you know, you want to do your community service, you go to Madare, you want to do your internship, you look for a psychiatric hospital or an office and stuff like that. So I did the Mathare thing. It's fine, everyone did it. But now when it came to my internship, I decided I wanted to go to Kenyatta National Hospital. When I went there, they were not very receptive, although I had all the credentials that were supposed to let me through. But there was also this thing, USIU, oh, you're such a snob, you're a snowflake, you know, utakuja tu kutusumbua. I remember sitting outside the office of the chief executive officer for like a week. And that is how that persistence of mine is what made the guy even give up. He's like, I'm tired of seeing you here, fine, start your internship. And I was like, yay. So K&H now was an interesting avenue because it opened me up to the fact that at the base of all treatments that was happening there was a mental dysfunction, mental illness, mental disturbance that was underneath. If it was not with the patient, it was with the nurse, it was with the doctor, it was with even the specialist, it was with the family, it was with even the subordinate staff. And so now I have this big picture where I'm thinking, what role does psychology have in terms of being able to support all these people who are day to day working, saying, we want to make you better. Better physically, yes. But what about mentally? What's going on there? What's happening there, right? So during that era, I don't know how many of you remember or were born, I don't know, but stay with me here. The biggest thing was HIV and AIDS. So as a young student, I went and I studied, took a VCT course, and I actually started testing people. That also took me places because, you know, that's when I got to learn about even psychosis that was organic, caused by HIV. I got to test people who were so high, got to test people who were so low. I got to make home visits to people who had never heard of HIV. So all this time, so many questions are accumulated in my mind. But where am I taking these questions, right? Because let's be honest, our professors at the time, I'm not speaking ill of them, I'm just saying how it was. Our professors at the time had been born in Kenya, educated in Kenya, but went for higher education in the US, for their masters, for their PhD, came back, started the academic work in the university. So in as far as being able to start relating what's happening in the field to what is in an academic point of view and how to apply all that, there was a handicap. I'm just being honest with you. I'm just being honest with you. And I'm saying that because the introduction of psychology, having been done by USIU, 1979, through education, up to that point, and even today, is solely academic. And I'm saying we need to look at that, right? We really need to look at that. So anyway, I graduate from my master's and I see this advert. You know, I don't know whether you guys, okay, then there was a newspaper. I can't remember the last time I read the newspaper, but then, of course, there was no digital anything. So I opened the newspaper, announcement on the recruitment of cadets and specialist officers for the Kenya Defense Forces. I'm like, this is exciting. So come to the, because you know, if you wanted to use the internet, you had to come to the lab. It was somewhere down there. So I check up like how many psychologists are in then it was known as the Kenya Armed Forces. Nil results. Okay, I go check, I'm like, what if I need to know about the Kenya Armed Forces, what's the history? Zero results. The only thing I found on there was relating to HIV and the work that was being done with the United States military. Okay, so that was all. So by the time I am going into, recruitment, by the time I am going for my basic training, me, I don't know, there's no other psychologist in the military. Me, I don't know, because the information is not there. And you go, you're there, you're asking them, and they're like, who are you to ask questions? And actually, I didn't know how much my presence, my profession would be triggering to them. Ati unakuja hapa, ati wewe ni mtu wa nini? Ulisikia jeshi iko na azimu. So again, we come back to what is the understanding of what psychologists do and what they have to offer. So it turns out I'm a pioneering psychologist. Great. Okay. And so I'm starting to work with people who are essentially guided by rank, and that is supposed to determine your intelligence. It's supposed to determine what happens next. People who don't want to know or accept what they don't know because of the ranking system. What I'm trying to say here is that my knowledge of psychology was not helping me break through that, okay? So, after basic training, something happened to me. I got speech aphasia. Like, I would want to say something and relate it in a psychological term. It would be in my mind, it wouldn't come out of my tongue. And I panicked. I said, oh my God, what have these people done to me? So what did I do? I ran to USIU. I had my alumni card. So I ran to USIU. Why did I come here? Because I thought, if there's a place that's actually going to help me come back to myself, it's the USIU library. So I'm saying that this library is a lifesaver. Of course, then it wasn't here, it was down there. But you know what I'm saying, okay? So what happened was that as a psychologist, being able to understand illness and dysfunction was not enough when it now came to negotiate and influence people who are decision makers to adapt psychology. You know, that's one thing psychology here does not teach. How do you adapt psychology to where you are? How do you get people to buy into that? So I'm talking about this so that you can know, although this is not being taught, you need to be able to do it. And so everything continues and we get to the point where now we are at war. Okay? It had never happened in Kenya before, I'll call it since 63. Of course, it had happened prior, but it was not in the organized Kenya Armed Forces as it was named then. You know, it was the Kenya Land Army, which people like to refer to as Mau Mau. So in as much as there were skirmishes here and there, and you know, you can always look it up, there was a new dimension that came with this fight with Al-Shabaab in Somalia. And it opened up a new window of human behavior and human dysfunction that was war-related. Now, this one was tricky because I heard him say the way everything he says here is his opinion, his employer has nothing to do with it. Yeah, but so you can imagine for me, it was the same. I couldn't even talk about anything with anybody. You know, because now everything is top secret now when it comes to that. So that is when, for me, I discovered that even as a psychologist, I was not actually immune to the psychological impact of the war, right? Somehow you think that your profession protects or guards you from the world or its realities. I think for me, what I'm saying is that when you're proximate to the work that you're doing, you will always be more involved in it than you probably imagine you're guarded from. So just something for you to be aware about. Because I don't think that you can do some of this work if you're actually detached from it, in a sense. But there is one thing about human suffering that you can't close off your eyes to. And it's important to talk about this because that idea of human suffering and connecting it with our own policies, connecting it with our own ability to empathize and therefore inform the rules we put for ourselves, even social rules, we must connect those dots, right? A good example, again, I'll refer to you, is the example he gave about that boy who was shot in their community. Now, maybe what he didn't say is how that incident and the death of that boy affected the community, including the same children who come to the library, right? Now, that's a conversation that we must understand is not just the psychology for those children, but we're talking about community psychology, yeah? What are we talking about there? So how do we also understand why our community is behaving the way it is behaving? And it is something you will not come and read in books, but it is something, if you approximate enough to, that you take time to process, you can actually write about, present about, and have a discourse around it. For me, which I think is very important, because that's the only way you collect people, so that you have somebody who is probably not so emotionally attached to the issue to just be enraged, provide solutions, provide alternatives, provide networks. For me, that's what I would like to see, because you definitely will not be able to find it written in any book. So we move on from there, and without having any frame of reference that is locally available, set up a system that is supposed to support soldiers and families. Again, where does this audacity come from? It comes from understanding the needs that are there. You know, and for me, this is what I want young people to know, even here in USIU. Let your work inform what you need to do. There's this thing where you're like, has anybody done it before? No. Aye. But if nobody has done it before, who am I to do it? You are who you are. You are the one. It is you, right? And you actually know more than you think you do. So just step up with the work. So my work helped me create things I had never imagined, that USIU never prepared me for, but I had to step into. So by the time I was resigning my commission, it was very clear to me that there was a sort of a conveyor belt that was breaking down when soldiers are really, really deep in psychological wounds caused by the war. And there was no support, right? The best thing that was being done was putting them out into the society. But because for me, I was able to have that connection, I was able to see what was happening once they left. What was happening to communities, to families, to wives, to children. And that's why True North began. And coming to a point of realizing, oh, this thing is national. Because you see, when that recruitment is happening, if you ever look at it, it just doesn't touch on all counties. It touches up to your village, where people go and do their things, others write letters. And that is what now brought me, as a psychologist, into the legislative process. Going to meet with parliamentarians, saying, will you champion my bill? What do I know about making laws? I don't know anything. But guess what? People within my paradigm knew, because I asked the question, who can help me with this? So ask, who can help me with this? So I got into legislative advocacy, again, by being proximate to the work. And so you can imagine, since independence, we still, we stand every day and we say Madaraka Day, we stand every day, we say Jamhuri Day, or people who defend us, but we do nothing for them. And actually, There's a running joke that is there, because you know, jokes in the security sector, especially the military, it's always gallows humor jokes. Like if I told those kind of jokes right now, you guys would take me somewhere to be assessed, right? But that's how people stay feeling something with gallows humor's jokes. But it was like, for every person who finally retires, give them 5 years, they are gone. And you'd be like, that's acceptable. But for me, I decided that's not acceptable at all, right? So what I'm saying is that the work keeps moving forward. And it's important, when you're doing the work, document the work. When you're doing the work, understand that there's an ecosystem of the work, because that now led us to be engaged in the Mental Health Act, the amendment. I don't know how many of you were involved in it. It led us into pursuing the formation of the Counselors and Psychologists Board. So there are things you won't learn in class, but understand your ecosystem. Because your ecosystem informs your day-to-day, even if you're not aware. It actually influences your career progression, it influences your life satisfaction, and stuff like that. So the beauty about this book, you've heard from the editors, there are over 200 authors, but the beautiful thing is that everybody gets to talk about their country as is. As is. So, maybe all of you don't do psychology, right? All of you are not in USIU. But if you are to write about your profession in an international handbook, truthfully, what will you say? I'll stop there. Thank you.